Lost all that bravado and that, like, I lost all of that. And for a while, I was like, what happened to that person who, you know, felt like she could do whatever she wants to do? Because I didn't feel that way for a few years. But I guess that's part of, I can say it now because I'm past it. But I guess that's part of the journey, isn't it, Yvonne? It's just like, that's just part of what you go through. It's just like, if it's like a river, well, then there's rocky parts and there's like lots of, water, and then there's the shallow part. Like, there's just part of it. And so maybe, who knows, maybe I wouldn't have gotten to the point where I'm at now, where I'm a little bit more at ease, at peace with what I'm doing, with what I'm about to do. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten here if I hadn't gone through that rocky phases. I don't know.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast, where we are reimagining and redefining what it means to be in midlife, where we are gathering energy, momentum, and excitement for our next chapter via candid conversations with other midlifers about their own pivots, pitfalls, and triumphs. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. Have you ever thought, what if? What if I quit my job? What if I start a new business? What if I start writing that book? I'm gonna guess the answer is yes. I mean, we all go down the what if path at some point, don't we? When you ask yourself those kinds of questions, do you start acting on them? Or do you find yourself immediately shutting down and deciding that they are unrealistic? Well, I have a little bit of inspiration for you today. My guest on the podcast this week is back for a second conversation, and I'm so excited. She was the second interview I ever did, and if you want, you can stop here and go back to episode 3 to hear our first conversation, or go back to that episode after you finish this one if you're curious or if you feel like you want more information about her story. I am so happy to welcome back Lou Blaser, who is the editor of the Midlife Cues newsletter and the host of the podcast Second Breaks. Now, Lou wasn't always a podcast host or media maven. Oh my gosh, she'd be so embarrassed if she heard me say that. Well, she will hear me say it, I guess. Anyway, in fact, Lou used to hate the sound of her own voice. Lou had a very successful career as a management consultant, but felt the need to step away and blaze a new trail in her midlife. She started a business as a business coach because that seemed to make the most sense based on her past skills. It's been a windy path that's led her to hosting her podcast and writing her newsletter. It took some time for her to figure out the right path for her, but she figured out a way to channel her curiosity, her love of research, and her reading obsession into something that is helpful for other people and allows her the flexibility she needs to start her new grand adventure, which you'll hear all about in this episode. I can't wait for you to hear all about it. So without further ado, here's Lou Blaser. Oh my goodness, Lou, you're back.
Thank you for having me back.
I am so excited. Well, so much is going on in your life since we last spoke, and I'm so excited for you. And I mean, everything. Your podcast has changed. Your newsletter has changed. You are getting ready to move out of the country. Oh my goodness. So maybe we need to go back for anybody who didn't hear your first episode. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So, uh, obviously, the name is Lou Blaser, and I was here at Late Bloomer Living. I was so excited that Yvonne asked me to join her. I think I was episode 3 or 4
You
or
were.
five
You
or
were my
something like that.
second interview ever.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and I had been listening to your podcast for some time and knew you through the What Works Network. And I was like, Lou, I just love the podcast, and everything about you just seemed very approachable. And I was so still at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, is anybody ever going to say yes to being a guest? I don't know.
Well,
So I'll
I was
ask Lou
so
and see what
thrilled.
she says.
I was so thrilled. I felt so thrilled to be joining you as you were embarking in that on that new journey. And it's amazing that it was just a year ago, I think it was, because I
Yeah,
remember it was like, I think we were just, COVID was just happening when we spoke.
yeah,
And it's amazing that in that span of a year, 12, 13 months, however long it was, so much has changed. And so I will uh, just briefly say this because in the audio, obviously, this is a podcast, people don't see me, but probably the biggest change is physically, visually for me is that I now am sporting gray hair.
and you look awesome. I love it. I'm in the process myself.
Oh, really?
I got the grays coming in, girl. It's very exciting. And like you, I reserve the right to change my mind. But for
Exactly.
right now, I'm curious and I want to see where this goes.
This is it. This is it. This is basically what happened during my 2020 COVID year. My hair just grew. But you were asking me a little bit about my background. So I am a podcaster. I host a podcast called Second Breaks. I'm also a publisher of a weekly midlife focused newsletter called Midlife Cues. Those are basically my passion, my babies. They are what makes for my meaningful work in my world, and so that's what I do for work purposes. And
Yeah.
since last time we spoke, that's what I've been focusing on. Just I think when we last spoke, the newsletter was just born or had just been born, and so I was focused on iterating that, improving that, and yeah, that's basically it in a
Yeah.
nutshell.
And for people who didn't hear your first episode, so you were not always a podcaster. You were in the corporate world.
Yes.
That was your life, right?
Yes.
C-suite.
So I had very briefly, so I did come from the corporate world. That was my career for over 16 years. And I didn't ever think that I was ever going to leave it. I was perfectly fine climbing the corporate ladder. And then the bug bit me in 2014. That's when I decided to step away from the stable corporate career and try something new. And I initially started as a career coach. That was my first sort of thing that I did outside of my corporate world or my corporate role. I did that for several years. And most of what we talked about the last time I was on the show was how messy that whole period was for me. It wasn't your typical, or maybe not typical, it's just the usual story that we hear is I was like this, then I decided to do this, and yay. And I
Right.
think,
We usually get the nutshell version
yes,
and
we
we
leave
lose
out,
the
yeah,
details of all the messy middle that happened in between that was like the
yeah.
figuring out and the pain points
Yes.
that come up in between, right?
Right. And so sometimes it's funny you said that because sometimes you think that there is no messy because you don't hear the messy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That was certainly what I was thinking when I was in the messy period was that how come I couldn't figure this out? Because a lot of other people have made the switch perfectly smoothly, and I was not having a smooth, transition. I was happy that I was transitioning, but it wasn't smooth. And so my messy was, you know, quite a period of time. And that was kind of what we talked about in the last show. And then things started getting uh, moving towards the right direction, shall we say, or getting smoother for me. Uh, Around 2018, 2019 is probably when it started shifting. So that now I no longer am doing any kind of career coaching. I'm not doing that now anymore. And instead, I'm really focusing on my new business or my new media company, which is publishing digital media for midlifers,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. And so you started off with your newsletter was briefing notes, and
Mhm.
now this year, I
Yeah.
mean, it's so exciting because also, so the podcast started, what year was that?
So the podcast started while I was still doing career coaching.
Right. And so
And
that was
so,
very business focused. You Second
yes.
Breaks was primarily about like a
Yeah.
second like chance at what are you going to do next career wise,
Yeah.
or right. And so now, I mean, it's been like so cool because you've gone through this blossoming, and I love that you have allowed yourself to play in the sandbox of what is it and what do I really like, honing in on what you want to talk about. And you've gone away from it being so much about business, and now you've dived in. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
Dove in, dived in. And but you're really going into the idea of how to live your best midlife, how to age well,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. It, although while I was doing it, it didn't feel as choreographed. It only
Mm.
feels choreographed after the fact,
Uh-huh.
right? Like it only
Uh-huh.
feels like that after when you look back. But actually, when it started, so to kind of just give a little bit of context, this pivot to a new kind of work, a new way of living, basically working, happened when I made a decision with my sister to move. You alluded to it, I think, earlier when we were starting the conversation, that I'm about to move to the Philippines to be with my mom and with my sister. And so we had made this decision. I made this decision with my sister back in November 2019, so before COVID. And it should have happened last year, except for the world shut down last year.
Right.
So it kind of got pushed. But basically, I'm moving to be with mom. My mom is in her 90s, and she suffers from or she has mild
Mm-hmm.
dementia. So, and I just want to be with her for as long as I can. I feel lucky that I still have one parent alive, but I just want to be, if it's 2 years, if it's 3 years, if it's 5 years, however long, I just want to be with her. So my sister has been taking the lion's share. She's been doing all the caring for my mom this last 4 years. So I also want to help my sister in that respect. And
Yeah.
the work that I do by design is location independent. All I need is internet and a computer, and I can do it anywhere. So I'm like, this is by design. This is the kind of work that I, created because I wanted to be anywhere. And so
Yeah.
I can do this now. And so when she and I made this decision to do this, that's when I started asking, what do I want to do for work? Like, do I want to continue the kind of work that I was doing before? And I didn't want to do the kind of work where I might have to be interfacing with people
Mm-hmm.
for certain periods of time, because I
Massive
don't know
time
yet.
difference if you're working with
Exactly.
people in the United States,
Right.
right? All of a sudden
Exactly.
you're dealing with being up at who knows what time,
Exactly. So
right?
that's when I started to think about, okay, well, what do I want to do? And I went back to the drawing board, and I started realizing that I have these, dreams of wanting to write and wanting to publish, but I never really did, pursue them with, honestly, I didn't really pursue them. And so I said, well, I'm going to try that. And so in 2019, that's when I gave birth to the newsletter. That, that for a long time I didn't have a name because I didn't know what to call it. And then initially I was talking about career because that was what I was talking about all this time. I had always been talking about career development. I was always talking about career pivots on the podcast. And in my coaching work, that was what I was talking about, career pivots and reinventing your career, that kind of stuff. And so for a while, that sort of carried on with my writing on the newsletter as well. But then I started to feel like there were these other topics that I wanted to explore and that I wanted to share with my readers that went beyond career reinvention or career pivots, but are topics that are relevant for us. And so I started to play with it. I'm like, okay, what would my readers do if I start writing about, midlife health, for example, or any something else, if I step out of my self-imposed box and boundaries, what would my
Mm-hmm.
readers do? Will they unsubscribe? Will they stop reading? And so I just went there and I just started writing about those topics and I started sharing them. And you know what? I get all kinds of responses, more responses than when I was writing about career pivots and career reinvention.
Uh-huh.
And I paid attention to those sort of feedback and responses from the readers. I took them as, signals basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then and also I found myself really interested in you and I love going down rabbit holes. I know that.
Yes,
That's one
yes.
thing we both love to do. So I I also noticed that I loved going down those kinds of rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of fed each other. Like I love researching and reading and writing about these things. And then it seems like my readers like reading these things. So yay. Why
It's a
don't I just
match.
yeah, why don't I just go there and just embrace that and allow myself to go there? So that's kind of it was the newsletter first that I went all in and I embraced that this is what I talk about in the newsletter. I still talk about pivots, but that's not the only thing anymore. I talk about four other things. I call them my midlife obsessions. But so there are other things that I talk about outside of career pivots, but all topics that are relevant or important to us midlifers. And then the second breaks podcast continued along its natural thing that I used to be talking about for a while, but then it felt disjointed because on the
Mm.
newsletter I was talking about this, and then on the second breaks podcast I kept continuing to talk about just the one thing. And then earlier this year, I January, February, I think it was, I said, you know what, I'm just going to embrace that too and say I am going to broaden the topic of what we talk about here on Second Breaks. And I did that. And so now they are all in sync and aligned, and all is happy.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you're glowing, and um easy for me to say, the newsletter is so good.
Thank you so
So
much.
good. I look forward to it every Sunday morning. I can't always read it on Sunday, but I go back and find it. And I love the way you do a mix of curating articles. So you kind of take your reader down the same rabbit hole that you went down, which is great. There it's like, oh, okay, so you have some things to say and a link to your source, and it just kind of, it's like you can kind of just kind of go down the rabbit
Yeah,
hole, which
with me.
I love.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
fantastic. And then I always love your kind of 80s culture references, which are very fun.
Can I just tell you? So it's the segment of the newsletter. So for the listeners, the newsletter has regular sections or segments. Every Sunday you have these sections, and one of the sections is called "Remember the Time," and I have so much fun researching that, that section, or coming up with topics for that section. And then I also get all kinds of funny responses from people about that section. So
I bet. Well, it's, we love that, right? It's the memorabilia. It just
mhm.
takes you back. It's like a little time machine to
Yes.
see whatever Lou cooked up for this week's newsletter. It's a nice little time
Yeah.
machine throwback.
It's been it's been really fun. And one of the things that I, you know, sort of tying this back to our earlier conversation when I first joined you on the podcast, one of the things that I really felt differently about, because in effect, I'm building a new thing again, right? So, one of the things that I noticed about myself this time around is that I am less worried about, is this ready for the quote unquote public? Is this as close to perfect as I can get it? Like, if we were to go back 2015, 2016, even 2017, I was worried about that a lot. I was worried about whether this episode that I was going to hit, publish, is it really good enough? Is it as perfect as I could make it? If I was going to write a blog post, is it good enough? Like, I was always worried about whether it's quote unquote as perfect as I could, make it. Whereas this time I said, well, I'm going to just experiment and see what happens. I'm going to see how I feel about the process. And I'm also going to pay attention to what the readers are saying, because I'm doing this for them too. So I call them my reader. You are my reader friends. So if they like it, then yay. I'm going to, I found something that they find valuable or entertaining, uh, or that they welcomed in their inbox, versus too worried about whether it's good enough or it's ready. Or I think if I was worried about that, I still wouldn't have a newsletter.
Right, right. It's that boy, that is it's the biggest lesson that I've learned in doing my podcast, is that done is better than
Mm,
perfect. And because I will probably always be a recovering perfectionist, and all that is a fear of failure. And
yeah.
so the longer I niggle at something to try to get it just so,
Yes.
it's like, well, no, you got to get it done, because
Yes.
there's a time frame here. You got to publish, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And it's been a great experience for me, and I think for you too, to have to just let it go.
Yeah. And then I think the idea of, just play with it, just experiment. And you can always, if it flops, then you learn something. And then so you tweak it again for the next time round. And every week you have an opportunity to improve it or tweak it or whatever. So that's kind of like and maybe the COVID thing had something to do with that, because we were all stuck indoors anyway.
Right.
And so maybe that part of it was like just the overall sort of uh just the overall mood of the world that we were in. And so that was kind of like how I did it last year. And I think I wouldn't have changed anything about the way that I did it. I think it grew organically. I think it evolved organically. Even the finding of the name, I found it, or it took me forever to find a name, because I wanted it to mean something. I was calling it briefing notes for a while, but even I wasn't completely sold on the name. But then everything I came up with had already been taken. And then just a couple months ago, I think it was, that I landed on Midlife Cues. And I'm like, this is it. This is the name. And hello,
It
the
is
domain is
perfect.
available. And so, yeah, so even that came, nothing felt forced this time. Whereas many of the things that I did in the past felt forced. Like
Mm,
I was trying to fit, twist myself into a pretzel, or nothing here felt forced, which is great.
yeah. And you're writing, which is that was what you love to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yes.
that's always been something you
Yes.
loved to do. And here you are now. So, and I mean, how do you feel? I mean, I know that when you started the podcast, I think one of the first things that I ever remember hearing was an interview that you did with Tara
Mm-hmm.
McMullen
Mm-hmm.
uh, about confidence
Mm.
and how starting the podcast, you had a lot to overcome because you were not comfortable with your voice. So, where are you now in that soup?
So this is funny. I tweeted this about, I want to say 3 months ago, and Joanna Penn, who's one of my role models, and I credit her for helping me get past my my fears and for getting me to actually start a podcast. But I said, there, that feeling when you listen to an old episode and you don't cringe anymore because you realize you've learned to like your voice. And that was when I realized I got there. I got to that point where
Yeah.
I was looking for an old episode that I wanted to refer to. And, and so I was going through my archive, and it was like episode 20, or like one of the earliest episodes. And I was looking through my show notes, and I didn't capture a particular sort of uh, portion of the conversation. So I had to actually listen to it to recapture that piece of information because there was no transcript. And I didn't cringe. I just like, okay, all right, that's it. And then it was only after that I'm like, oh, I learned to like my voice. This is my voice. This is because for a long time, that was one of my concerns. I didn't like my voice. I was worried about how I sounded to other people, which is
Mm-hmm.
funny because other people have always heard my voice. Right, when we're talking, other people are hearing our voice, but somehow recording your voice and you listening to your recorded voice, I don't know. For me, we talked about this when you were on my podcast, but that was such a big, you know, uh, obstacle for me to get past. And I just got through there. And I guess it had to do with just reps, just like over and over after I've
Yeah.
just published the 164th episode. So after
Oh,
164 episodes,
congratulations.
you're like, oh yeah, that's my voice.
164 episodes. That is
Yes.
no joke. That is no joke. Because, you know, it's a marathon, this
Mm,
whole podcast
mm,
production thing. There's a lot of bits and pieces and little things that have to get done to, it's not just recording your voice and posting it.
mm.
There's a lot. And man, oh man, I mean, yeah, there you are. It's amazing to me how I think so many people think that, okay, that person is just confident, right? But confidence, certainly for me, confidence comes from the doing of something.
Yes.
It's like when I first started photography, um, oh my goodness, I couldn't sleep the night before sessions. I had, it was like checklist. Do I have every, and I'd be so nervous. Oh, the butterflies going into doing a session. And, so many years later now, I'm like, oh, I have a session today
Yeah.
or I have a session tomorrow. I better send them a confirmation.
Right.
And
Right.
the confidence has only come from the doing, and I still make mistakes. Oh gosh, I'll be like, I'll see a whole series of photos that, my lost track of my camera settings, and I'm like, look at how long have I been doing this? You know, ah,
Yes.
but
But
I know how to get around it now.
do you remember, because I don't, do you remember when the confidence, when you started to feel confident? Do you remember? Because I don't. For me, it almost feels like, oh, I didn't realize I feel confident about this now. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't remember when it actually happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Are you asking me about the podcast or the
Either,
photography?
either for anything that when you felt not
Yeah.
quite confident before.
I think it was when, my husband probably pointed it out to me because, he would of course always hear me being like, "Oh, I have a photo session. I'm not, I don't know if I'm ready. Wedding. And I think I got to the point where I'd be like, "Oh, I have a photo session tomorrow," and he's like, "Wow, remember when you used to, you know?"
Yes.
So having him point that out was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm
Yes.
I'm not as I'm not as nervous heading into these things." And then with the podcast, oh my gosh, I can't. I'm almost curious to go back and listen to old interviews because it was like I would tell my guests I would get so nervous just at the beginning, just
Mm-hmm.
just those first
Yeah.
couple of like, "Hey Lou,
I
thanks for
still
being
do.
here" thing, right?
Yes.
I that has gotten better. Like I hit the record button and boom, it's like, "Hey Lou, thanks for
Mm-hmm.
being," and I just launch in and I don't feel like I used to feel apologetic or like, this is
Mm-hmm.
weird now. Now we're starting and we were just talking, but now it's recording and it all felt like crunk awkward.
Yes.
Um and now it's just like, okay, hit record, let's go,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, and I don't know
Totally.
when that switch flipped, but it
So
did.
totally what you said about it just comes from the doing. It's like
Mhm.
after a while you don't even realize it that you're there. You're past the jitter. Like it's just okay, this is what I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I guess my point, people, is don't expect to feel confident. You got to do the stuff when you're scared. That's when
Yes.
you have to step into
Yeah.
the doing, is
Because it
do it
doesn't.
scared.
Yeah, and you won't always feel scared, or even if you still feel scared, it'll get less and less.
Yeah.
It'll um like there are some people who I've interviewed who I still feel that initial sort of stomach flutter when I'm going to start. And like Joanna Penn, like I said, it was one of my role models. I've interviewed her twice on the podcast. Twice only, or did I interview her three times? Or definitely at least two times. And I've met her in person, and yet I still feel that sort of jittery feeling because I look up to her so much, right? But you get I get past that quicker now,
Hmm.
and I sound less of a fangirl than I was the first time I did it. So we get better, and the fear gets a little, it's not as much, it kind of fades away.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I love this whole thing. Wow. So you are getting, my mind is blowing for you. Your head must be ready to pop off your body with preparing to make this big move, Lou.
Yes, yeah.
So exciting.
I so there's a lot of tactical to dos. The packing, the donating, the because at the same time that I'm doing this, I'm also downsizing. I
Hmm.
have this idea. I've always liked this idea of living in an airstream kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I never would do it, but I love that idea of everything that you own could fit in like an airstream, right?
Yes, I'm with you. I could never do it. I do not pack light ever. But yes,
Right?
but I feel you. I totally like, oh, I want to get some sort of RV and go
Right?
across the country and,
Exactly.
have that free experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here you are, you're downsizing. Oh, and that reminds me of something that I was thinking about with you that I want to ask you, and it's the perfect time. Your life has it's a 180, right? You, you were corporate executive, and now you are carving your own path. How
Mhm.
how do you feel changed, like in your essence?
I will share a story. So a couple 2 3 weeks ago, I had a dinner. We had a big dinner before Florida Delta COVID Delta variant
Mm,
stats shot up again. But anyway, 3 4 weeks ago, I had dinner, big dinner with some old friends, someone that I hadn't seen in over a decade. So the last time she saw me, I was still in New York.
mhm.
I was still in corporate, I still had my corporate job. And apparently, I don't actually remember this situation. She was reminding me over dinner. Apparently, I had hosted like something at my own place, and she was one of the people I invited. And so there were probably about, I don't know, 15, 16, 18 people. And she was saying how, like she said to me in the middle of dinner, she said, "Lou, you look and sound so different." And immediately I pointed to my hair because I'm like, well, obviously I look different. I look so different because I have gray hair now. Um, you know, so she said, No, it's nothing to do with physical, like how your hair looks or how much you gained, the weight you gained. It's not that. It's like she said it. I come across so open and so free now, whereas when she last saw me, which was over a decade ago in New York, I was so serious, and even though it was a party, but I was so serious and so controlled, and she was like, she smiled. She's like kind of uptight, and she was sort of like apologetic for using
Yeah,
that word.
right.
And I was just laughing, and I was like, you know what? That's that was probably a fair description of who I was back then. I was fairly controlled. I was fairly serious, and probably came across uptight. And now I don't feel that way. I don't feel uptight
Yeah.
today. I don't feel so controlled. I don't feel, I mean, I think I'm still serious, but I really feel open and more willing to try to experiment. This I know about myself for sure. I feel more free to experiment or maybe talk about what I'm experimenting on more than I did, say, a decade ago. And it's so it's when people say that those things to me that I realize the journey or the change that has happened over the years. Because I don't know that on my own that I would have picked up on it until she said it. And then I started reflecting, and then I started journaling about it, and then I started thinking, and yeah, I guess that's what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that what I see is somebody who has become incredibly courageous.
Thank you.
You
I
know,
like that. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. I'm getting teary actually. But what you're doing takes incredible courage to get off of the mainstream,
Mhm.
to step away from having a title
Hmm.
that gives you, there's that your place in the world, or that people
Yes.
can hang a
Yeah.
hat on who you are and what you're capable of. And,
Yeah.
you know, um, and you have stepped away from that and are forging your own path. And
Hmm.
that takes incredible courage. And that's what I see
Thank
when I
you.
see what you're doing now.
I so appreciate that. Um, the funny thing is that, so when I was much younger, when I was still in corporate America, people would say to me, oh, you're very headstrong, or you're very like determined, and you're very, da, 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 which I wore with pride. Like, yeah, I'm that. Like, yeah, of
She's
course
doing a
I
really cute little head weave bob, folks. I wish you could see her right now.
am.
She's got
People
the
tell you
full
these things. Yes, exactly. People tell you these things, and you're like, yeah, that's me.
right.
But then, and then you do something like this where you step away from that world and you try something new, and it requires a different kind of courage. Which for a while, like, really, guys, like, if you listen to the first episode or the very first time I was on this show, you'll hear all the messiness of that time period. Like, I lost all that bravado, and that, like, I lost all of that. And for a while I was like, what happened to that person who
Mm,
you know felt like she could do whatever she wants to do? Because I didn't feel that way for a few years. But I guess that's part of, I can say it now because I'm past it. But I guess that's part of the journey, isn't it, Yvonne? It's just like, that's just part of what you go through. It's just like, if it's like a river, well, then there's rocky parts, and there's like lots of, you know, water, and then there's the shallow part. Like, that's just part of it. And so maybe, who knows, maybe I wouldn't have gotten to the point where I'm at now, where I'm a little bit more at ease, at peace with what I'm doing, with what I'm about to do. Uh, Maybe I wouldn't have gotten here if I hadn't gone through that rocky phases. I don't know, but
yeah. And you're simplifying, I mean, right down to like the shedding of stuff,
yes, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other thing too, because, like, I feel like it. The more, this is just me, so please, I'm not like trying to tell people anything. That this is just my experience. Is that all the things that I quote unquote owned, that I'm now discarding, um, is like weight off. Like, it's a release.
Mm,
There's a weight that was accompanying all those objects, because one of the things that I committed to was that I wasn't going to rent a storage unit. That was the thing. I said, I am not renting a storage unit. It's either I'm going to take it with me, or it's going to get sold or discarded, donated, thrown away. But nothing goes to storage unit. And I've stuck to that so far. But yeah, I feel like every box, every bag, everything, every time Salvation Army comes and picks up, I feel like, there's
yeah.
another few, um, and some of the old labels, some of the old stories, some of the things that these objects represented, that I'm like letting go. So maybe that's part of why I feel so open and
It's amazing. Like
free.
I in my mid 20s I did. I mean, it would be a whole different thing now. But it was in my mid 20s I did sell almost everything I owned,
Mm,
and made the move from Denver to New York City with what I could fit in my car.
yes.
And it
I've
was
always loved those kinds of stories. Every time I hear that kind of story, there's a part of me that's just, oh, I want to do that. Now I'm doing
it
it.
was exactly, you're doing it. It was very liberating. It was so liberating to just shed the stuff.
Yes.
And, and then when I did move into a place in New York, I bought a futon, and that was my piece of furniture for a while. I had I had
Yes. Yeah.
I think I used a box as a night table for a while, and and
Yes.
then slowly you just start to accumulate
There
things
you
again.
go.
Oh my gosh,
Right.
stuff.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I I had moved around, but I wasn't very good with packing when I moved around before. I just packed everything. And so they just, all these years and years accumulated, just getting more and more boxes packed and then shoved into closets when you move
Oh,
to a new place.
yeah.
And this time I would open a closet and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've forgotten that I had this, or I can't even remember the last time I don't even remember that I had them. Right.
Right. You're making me want to go clean out my closets, Lou. They're terrible. They are overflowing. It's awful. Awful. My car is full.
Yes.
My closets are full. It's too much.
So yes, that's kind of my, if the listeners could see what Yvonne is looking at right now, it's a half bear, bookcase and messy mess. So I'm living with mess right now because it's in the process of that, uh, getting sorted out between donating and throwing out and selling and packing. But yeah, in about 3 weeks, I will be out of here in this apartment, and then the big long travel begins because I will basically travel to family first. So I leave my home, I live with family first in Orlando for a few days, visit with them for a few days, and then from there go to New York, visit with family in New York for a couple of days, and then I get on a big plane to Asia.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Oh my gosh. And what's the date of the big flight to Asia?
Last day of August, August 31st.
Oh my
And then
goodness.
and then of course there's a big time difference. So first of all, it's a long flight.
Uh-huh.
And then on top of that, there's a time difference. So I leave New York time at 5 p.m. New York time, and I land in Asia. So that's August 31st, and I land in the Philippines on September 2nd. So it's not like, how many days are you traveling?
Wow.
but also because there's a time difference. That's why. But
Right.
I mean, I'm practically traveling for about 24 hours, 25 hours, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's going to be lots of time on the plane editing podcast episodes. Is basically what I'll be doing.
There you go. There you go. See, this is why you're good at what you do. You're like, what the heck? I'll just work on the plane. You
I have
you you have set yourself up to make this work.
yes, yeah.
I just have huge admiration for you in all the thought that you've put into the structure of what you're doing, and not just that, but doing something in a way that feeds you, and
Mhm.
that you have put yourself in the position of being able to go down rabbit holes,
Yes.
and now it's your job. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
it's like genius.
Right. I mean, every time I think about that or I tell people about that, I laugh because what used to make me feel guilty is like, no,
Uh-huh.
I don't feel guilty about it. I like, this is what I do. I go down
Research.
rabbit holes.
It's research.
Research.
That's my job.
But I would say too that I guess maybe this comes with maturity, with our age, the phase in life we are in. But like you asked me before, I think it was before we hit record. I can't remember when you asked me, but like I will be moving into my parents' home, my mom's place, basically. Um, and where my sister lives now, she had remodeled the home. And so it's a it's a relatively big place, so it's not like we're going to be on top of each other, but we are going to be living together. And 10 years ago, I might have uh, been stressing about that. But now I feel like, no, it's an adventure. Mom's in her 90s, so I'm just gonna have fun with her. And like I've been saying, if I get to spend a couple years with her, because she's in her late 90s, and that'll be awesome. I'll be so
Yeah.
grateful, right?
I
And
feel like it's the best choice you could make. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I feel like you would never regret.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love my sister. My sister and I have always gotten along well together, although we're complete opposites. Like, seriously, she is as extroverted as I am introverted, but we get along fairly well together, funnily enough. And so I'm actually looking forward to hanging out with her, and just spending time with her, and also just helping her out, at home. And so yeah, so I'm looking at this as just another adventure. And if it's open ended right now, so if it's 2 years, if it's a year, if it's 3 years, you know I've basically said it's an open ended sort of adventure for
Yeah.
now. The next chapter, we'll see
Yeah.
how it goes.
It's being comfortable with the uncertainty. You've gotten yourself to the place where you're
Yeah,
just stepping into it with gusto.
for the supposed controlled person, it's a strange thing to be saying. But
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm somebody who didn't realize what a control freak I actually
Hmm.
am
But do you
until
feel
recently.
loosening up a little bit with the control?
No.
No.
No, not I'm that's a lesson I'm learning right now. But I have to say, now that I know that I'm a control freak, I mean, that's awareness is the first step, right?
Yes. Yes. Totally. Yes.
Yeah, I had no idea what how bossy I was. I mean, I for ages that, when I get a camera in my hand, I feel full license to boss people around, and I joke about it. I especially if I'm getting big groups of people together, and suddenly I'm very loud and I'm like, you need to be over here. Oh, you can't hide. Step around, come around to the front,
Too funny.
I usually will make a joke and say I'm very bossy with the camera in my hand, and at which point my husband says, with a camera in your hand, and
You're always bossy, he means.
right. So now that's part of my standard joke. And I was, funny enough, doing a headshot for a former boss of mine who I had loved working with. But the company that we worked at, I was always very frustrated with some things that were internal to the way that they did things. And I would complain to her about the process and how it needed to be improved. And well, anyway, so I was doing her headshots and I'm bossing her. I'm like, okay, so now turn your head, put your face forward, turn your shoulders, blah, blah, blah. And I made the joke, and she just died laughing. She's like, oh my gosh, you are bossy. And I was like, what?
I wish I could see you in action. I totally, well, when I come back, because it's not like I'm moving and gone forever, right? When I come back, I have to see you in action, Yvonne. I want to see this side of you.
Yeah, my kids, I'm sure, would be like, oh yeah, she's bossy. But although I think maybe motherhood made me bossy. I don't remember being bossy
Yeah,
before. I have
maybe
to go
it's a
back and ask
requirement.
some
Yeah.
friends that know me pre-motherhood or something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
Because yeah, that whole journey essentially changed me.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just keep changing, and we
There you
just
go.
gotta,
You
what can we
know,
do? What can we
a year
do?
from now, a couple years from now, if you ever ask me back again, if
I will.
we might be talking about something different again. We probably will,
Exactly.
right?
I hope so, right? Because
So
we're
that's how
not
it
dead
is.
yet.
Yes,
This is
exactly.
like a process.
Right.
It's not like it's like, okay, I'm fully cooked now. Everything's
Yes.
good. I figured it all out. No,
This is it. No.
no, not even close to figuring it out.
Exactly. 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 Totally.
Lou, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for coming back. And good luck with the move.
Thank you so much. I'm just really thrilled that I get to be part of your journey. So thank you also for being my friend.
Oh my gosh, love it. And so people can find you the website now is
Oh
midlifecues.com,
yes,
right? So
yes.
there's
I've
yeah.
made the switch. So midlifecues.com, and there's a dedicated page when you get there. That's for the podcast, which is still called Second Breaks. But yeah,
All
midlifecues.com.
right. All right. People, subscribe. It is so worthwhile. You will love getting it in your inbox on Sunday mornings. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. I love talking to Lou, and I'll tell you right now, it's very likely I will have her back on the show further down the line to get the latest news. One of the things I love about Lou is that she allows herself to be led by her curiosity. She's one courageous woman. I love that she's always willing to step into the unknown with little more than faith in her ability to figure it out. I think that's the thing we all need in order to grow. A little bit of courage in the face of fear, and the faith in our ability to figure out things as we go along. So, that said, I want to challenge and encourage you to listen to your what ifs and take some action towards them, even if it's research. Research can help fuel your courage as you begin to get an understanding of what's needed to make your dreams a reality. So go down that rabbit hole. Read everything you can about that thing you want to do and see how it makes you feel. Does it make you feel like you wish you were already doing the thing? Does it make you impatient to get started? Good. Let it fuel you to take a baby step and see how that goes. And then take another step and see how that goes. And so on and so on. You can do it, my friend. It's never too late. If you want to know more about Lou, I'll have that information for you in the show notes. Just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and click on the show notes for episode 75. And I will include a link in those show notes to our original conversation that was episode 3. And hey, if you feel like you need a little more support in going after that what if, while you're checking out the show notes, you can also find a link there to sign up to receive a free guide that I created called 5 Steps to Your Midlife Reboot. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.